Hi, welcome to Building SaaS with Python and Django. My name is Matt Lehman, and we work on Django apps here. And I'm going to continue on an app. Well, you don't want to see my OBS setup. That's normally out of the way. Sorry about that. We're going to continue on a new app that I'm building, and hopefully you had a chance to tune in last time as we started to plan it out and saw some of the vision for the app. If you didn't, you can check out this link. This is the repository for the application, and there's a README here kind of highlighting the goals and some of the ideas behind it, and getting to what I consider the minimum viable product for this, what we need to build before it would be reasonable to open this up to a bunch more people. Last time we talked through a bunch of this, and I set up just the bare minimum of stuff. And as you can see, I've done a fair bit more since then. So we're going to talk through a little bit of what I did, but we want to get into the actual doing new stuff. We don't want to just talk about stuff that I did offline. That's not as fun. But before I start, you can I'll tell a bunch of ways that you can get in touch with me if you want to. There's a link above to my website, mattlehman.com. And I write a lot of articles about Python and predominantly Django these days. And there's a mailing list if you want to join that and get the articles as soon as they're out. I should have another one coming up in the next week or so about Django authentication and the whole user system. So that should be on the way. There is a Discord link below in the Twitch information. If you want to join in and chat with me there about topics that you have on your mind, you're welcome to do that. I check it periodically. And I also have some social stuff. So if you want to join, follow me on Twitter. I am at MB Lehman, just like my GitHub account here. And you can also support me on Patreon if that's your thing, and if you think that the content that I'm providing is something to throw a few bucks at. So in fact, I'm planning to use the contributions from current patrons to help support this particular app. We can actually maybe touch a little bit on budget today and what cost would look like. But before I do that, I want to thank the patrons that I do have. Thanks to my superhero level patron, Rupert, and my other patrons, Abdulaziz, Patrick, Mark, and Eric. Y'all are putting in some money that helps make some of these projects possible and help cover costs that I have for podcasts and other things. So thank you. Okay, so you're free to ask me anything about Python, Django, or web development as you have questions. It doesn't have to be on this topic of this social network, but that's what I'm going to be focused on. But I'm willing to take little tangents here and there as the need arises. But otherwise, we're going to focus on this chunk of code. The chat is open. You're free to ask questions. Please just be civil. Everybody seems to be able to do that these days, so it's all good there. Okay, so you can see I did quite a bit. And I did quite a bit because I was pretty fired up about the idea, and I wanted to have something in place, and I also wanted to skip a lot of the setup that I did for the homeschool app. So I'm still working on the homeschool application, the stream that I've been doing for quite a while. This is only my second stream on this topic of a social network, and I just didn't want to belabor the same kind of tool chain that I've been setting up there. So a lot of what you see here is actually kind of copied from the other project. I don't have a template that I can work from, but it's a lot of similar changes. So if you want to go review that, there are videos on my website. If you're over, like, what are these new tools he added? So there's this building SaaS section, and I believe that the homeschool project starts at episode 38, which is now getting kind of down in there. But what you can see from this list is some of these changes that I made about setting up different environment tools and debug toolbars and all these things, and I don't want to go over that stuff again. So we're going to skip a lot of that and jump straight into where we are today. Let's bring up the actual code and the project. Let's start it up. And so I've got the same command to run Heroku local, get things going, and you'll see where I've taken it since we started. It was just an empty project, and now I've got something. So I started with, what did I do? I've integrated Tailwind CSS as the CSS framework. I have selected, let's see, an orange theme of my own design, but that's the color scheme that I'm going with is an orange styling. It was an arbitrary choice, but I like orange, so we're going with orange. Then what else have I done? I've done a bunch of stuff. I've created a new model. In fact, that's probably something that we could update right away. My last project, my other project, I should say, it's not a dead project, had a graph tool of to show all the models that are in there. And I added a new Django application, so let's check it out, see what that looks like now that we have a new model in there. So I've done a bit of modeling to add an invite model, and we'll see how that fits in. It might just be standalone at this point. No, I put some foreign keys in there. So I've done a bit of modeling, and we'll talk through the flow changes that we're going to use. But this is all the models we're dealing with right now. And frankly, a lot of these things that you might see in this diagram actually come from Django. They're not things that I did myself so much. This abstract user group permission, all of these things are from Django. I did override the Django model, and I inherit that. So that's in my users app, which we can see over here. So here's my user model. It's not doing anything yet that's different from the abstract user, but I wanted to set it up for a future scenario where maybe I do decide to change something and extend it in some way. And the reason I did that, why would I do this? So we've got abstract user to user. The point of this is to give you customization on the user class. If you don't do this, like, you can use the user model that comes with the auth system, but then you have to stick with that, and changing over to a different model is more difficult because it does some table creation when you start up. So if you're starting a new project and you want a different user model from the get-go, then you have to set this up before even your first migration, which I had to do. In fact, I had already deployed to Heroku, and I had to go to the database and clear it out in order to add this feature back in. So that's something that I did since last time. The other thing that I did was I created this new invites app. So coming back to the README, a big part of the MVP was having an ability to do invite flows. And so I'm starting, as if I didn't prioritize this in a particular way, but I'm starting with this section right here. An invite flow for people. Hey, you're going to have to tell me how to pronounce your user handle. I've seen it. But welcome, Kuatlam. It's good to see you again. So we've got this this user invite flow, and that's what I've been working on so far. And that is what this invite model is for. I represented all of the state transitions that are part of this invitation. So the invitation scheme is going to be there to have one registered user connect to another registered user. And as I said, a big part of this design is that invitations will count against your total count of connections, unless of course somebody accepts it, and then the real connection will take over. But that's part of the way to reduce spam. So this was going to be a pretty critical element, and I didn't have any kind of email stuff set up yet, so I figured this would be a good place to start, like internal to the app. So I set up the model, and I created some tests for it. We've got a test file, and I also added some methods here to the model to do different state transitions. So there are states, there's a status field on this model that I have to kind of keep the model state together. And the way I'm wrapping that up on purpose, because sometimes when I make some of these model transitions, I set some other data. You can see, here's a good example of when the invitation will actually be sent via email, which is not done yet, we're going to set the time when it is sent and set the status, and that's going to be a kind of a critical state for keeping track of things. So by wrapping these methods up, I don't have to let any caller of this class fiddle with the actual state setting. It's more like they're just asking the model to do its thing, to send, accept, and reject, and so on. So that's where I'm at. What else can I show off? I think I've got a little bit more. Oops, I killed the server, so we'll go back and turn that back on. I haven't styled the login page, as you can see, but once we get into the app, I made a dummy account called me. Okay. So this is our index page. The thought here is that our index page is going to do double duty. So if you are, and many sites do this, this should not be new it's not a novel thing. If you're logged out, you'll get the welcome to this website. Here's why you should sign up for this awesome thing, whatever, the branding marketing page, the reason to join. And then once you're logged in, it'd be nice to just have your core experience be set at this root URL. So that is what we have, and I've got that in the views here. We can take a look at those as well. So if we go to the core views, you can see that it will actually trigger, depending on whether you're authenticated or not, which template it's going to render for the view. And this is going to be home-based. This is going to be the main view of the app when people are logged in. It will show information about their connections and all that kind of stuff, and whatever social network kind of features we ultimately want to put in the app. So that's what's here. And then there's no way to navigate to it yet, but there is the invites system. What did I call the URL? No, I called it users. Sorry. I haven't gotten to the invites part yet. So I made a page that is pretty straightforward so far. It is going to be the way to connect to somebody. So if two people are on the social network and they are not connected to each other, then they're going to get a simple page like this, and I did this intentionally. I don't want a ton of information. This isn't going to be like, here's your profile. The one thing that I think I might do, I'm still on the fence about, is what about a profile picture? So I think a feature that I want, and I'll go ahead and write it down now, is to use Gravatar. Maybe you're not familiar with Gravatar, but it's a profile service that is widely used by like WordPress, and I think it might have even come from WordPress. And it's a way to like let image hosting be somewhere else. So someone can create a Gravatar as their image, and it can be useful across sites. And the nice benefit of that is that in terms of like a bootstrapping function, I could set up Gravatar, and if somebody is using their email address, the way Gravatar works is through an email address. It does a lookup of a profile picture based on the email address, because they verify emails. And if you have an email and are able to look it up, you will get that person's profile picture, presumably. So the one thing I'm thinking about for like the request to connect page is possibly above like the username here. So I just made up Matt in this scenario, is to put a profile picture above that. So it'd be a very simple page. The other thing I'm trying to do with this whole project is to make this mobile friendly. So I'm also spending time going into the mobile responsive mode that's available on DevTools here by clicking this button. It's very similar on Chrome, but I use Firefox. And so here's the mobile view of this as well. So as we design these pages, this is going to be one of the constraints that is important. I want this to look good on a mobile device if that's where people want to use it. Okay, So that catches you up with the things that I've done, I think. And I need to maybe communicate next bit of vision about what else is there to do. A big piece of this will be setting up this service to send out emails. Like if you are not part of the network, the only way to get notified that someone is wanting you to join the network is going to be to send out an email about it. Similarly, if somebody sends you an invitation, you're not going to likely camp out in the application. Some people might eventually, but need to be able to send emails to say like, hey, someone sent you a request to join their network, and so there should be emails for that too. So I have to design a system to send out emails, and that's going to be a big piece of the pie. And I don't think we're actually going to get to that tonight, because some of these things have interesting constraints, like financial constraints. So let's take a minute to, or maybe more than a minute, to talk a bit about like budget stuff. I don't know. Maybe we'll add this to the README so that people get an idea of what this would cost. And let's create a new section, and we'll call it budget. I'm just going to talk through my thoughts on like what this could cost, because I do want to be mindful of cost, and this isn't something I want to worry too much about. But if this does ultimately become a tool that is successful, the burden would be on me as the maintainer to find out ways to pay for it and keeping costs at an appropriate level. So there's some upfront cost, and that's that we can talk about. So, and then there will be ongoing costs. The upfront cost that I see that's most obvious is some level of branding, and specifically like icon design. I'm not a designer, and I don't have a stable of designer friends that I can reach out to. So the branding that we'd want to apply is to minimally get an icon that is distinct and can be used and applied to the site, and something that I own, or whatever entity that ends up owning this site owns. So likely candidate would be to use something like Fiverr. And people have mixed feelings about Fiverr, but I think I like it as a service, and I've had good results from there in the past. But it's a marketplace for getting design stuff, and a wide variety of things that can be done here. But you can definitely find people that will do icon work. Let's see if we can search for icon design. And there are whole companies that like will crank out icons in an unbelievable amount of time. Like some of them have like a day turnaround, and they aren't necessarily the most glamorous design in the world. So sometimes you definitely get what you pay for. But you can find a reasonably designed icon with some number of revisions that you can go through and get some kind of basic branding for your site. So I'm not going to spend too much time on Fiverr right now, but that's a piece of that. So I want to say like Fiverr, and probably a budget of, I don't know, I think I spent an icon. Yeah, that's a good question, Quatlim. Yeah, my design, I'm going to be doing a lot of the like design of the templates and stuff. That part I do have enough HTML and CSS experience to be comfortable with. But it's when I get into iconography and some of that kind of stuff that my goes above my skill level. So from my perspective, it's worth paying folks at that level. So I might budget like, I don't know, somewhere in the range of $25 to $50 for an icon, a logo that is reasonable. And it doesn't have to be a perfect logo. but it, to have something that is slightly distinctive and not just a random icon you can find on the internet would be a good first step. So that's a bit of the biggest item that I can see from upfront cost. There's also a couple of other issues here. So there's going to be, let's talk about ongoing costs. And from that level, there is a domain name. And I have a domain name in mind. I don't want to share it yet because I'm not sold on the brand yet, although I have a good idea in my head. You're welcome. And so the domain name that I did see was at the host that I was looking at was like $30 per year. So I know you can get good, cheap domain names out there. The particular domain that I was looking at that I think is short and sweet is about that cost, but that's going to be one chunk of cost on this. The other ongoing cost that we'd have is hosting. And right now, I've deployed the site to Heroku and it's on the free tier. And the downside of doing that, there's a lot of upside, but the most obvious downside is when you're on the free tier, Heroku will cause your application to go to sleep. In other words, they turn it off if nobody's using it. And so the response time on an app that has gone into this sleep state is on the order of 10 to 20 seconds. Sometimes it's better, sometimes it's not so good. But that is the downside of that hosting, and they do that on purpose, I think, to give you some incentive to get off of that free tier. And so that's one constraint of the free tier on Heroku. The other constraint is you can't hook it up to a custom domain name, so you're stuck with what was it called, Mysterious Waters or something. That's the name of our app so far, is Mysterious Waters. And that's fine for doing some local development, but you certainly wouldn't want to go on a big marketing campaign on some generated name from Heroku that is not even at your domain. So that's another thing. Oh, no worries. If English is not your first language, like, look at me, I'm a native speaker. I'm stumbling over stuff, so I can totally understand what you're saying. So hopefully you can understand me as well. So we've got hosting, and that cost. So other reasons why free is not so good on Heroku. There's the time that takes to the app to boot up if it's been off for a while. There's the no custom domain. There's also the other big one is a limit on the Postgres database that's connected to it to, I want to say it's like 200,000 rows or something like that, which might seem like a lot, but some of these apps can generate a lot of data very quickly. So that just all means that in order to get the benefits of not having those constraints, we have to pay for hosting. And so for the hobby tier, which is the first tier in Heroku, you can do hosting, and I want to say it's $7 a month. Okay, so that's starting to get a clear picture of some of the big costs. The other one that I'm unsure about right now is we would need to integrate with an email service, and so I've been looking at email. And when considering SendGrid, SendGrid does have a free tier, but it's really small. It's like, and it might work for a long time, so I don't know. But it's free for 100 emails per day, I believe, is the levels that they have. So beyond that, I don't really know what the cost would be. So overall, if we, add these things up, that means that the cash outlay to get to minimum MVP is, and let's take worst case. That's MVP startup cost, and this is ignoring legal stuff too. I don't know how much I need to go down to some other legal avenues as well in terms of like setting up an LLC or something. I'm not really that serious about this yet, but that's something else to consider. But so if we say worst case, like use the upper end of the Fiverr range, and so that would be equal to 50 plus the $30 domain plus $7 for the first month. So we're talking $87 to even get started. And again, you don't have to, if you're starting your first app, clearly you don't have to spend that much money. You can find a cheaper domain name like that. I definitely had, my first domain was like $12 a year, so much cheaper than 30. And you don't have to go with branding. You can shy away from that and just use text or logos that are freely available on the internet. That's true too. So there are ways to keep costs down, but thinking about what I think would be good for a service that we may actually want to run and use as something to build upon on the stream that would actually have people using it. This is where my brain is going. And this is part of why I'm thankful for patrons. So if you're watching this later and you want to support me, I'm on patreon.com/mblayman. Anyway, so that's just a little discussion about budget and what this is going to look like probably. And I might update this with real numbers as we learn, and as I commit to some of these things. But I just want to give you an idea of that for now. Okay, so budget consideration. Let's table that. Oh, why did I even get to this topic? I got to this topic because of the discussion about invitations. So invites will require email. And how can we do that on the cheap? So how can we do that cheaply? That's the question we want to answer. Because I said, we're talking about hosting that is $7 a month. So if you send out an invitation and you click the button and click whatever forms I ultimately have that are over here, when do we send out the email and how? And there's a couple of answers here. So how can we send emails? How can we send emails? Let's just answer that. First way is directly. We could call SendGrid or whatever mail API we have in the request response process. Okay, so the pros of that is that it's very easy. Like calling it right in the view even would be the easiest thing in the world to do. The cons of that is that performance-wise, you're basically putting that burden of execution time onto the user. And if for whatever reason the API call to SendGrid, I don't know how quickly those things execute, if there's delay, if there's mail formatting, I'm not really sure. If there's delay, then all that cost is also felt by the user. So what a lot of systems will do is they will essentially send email requests to background workers. So that's like option number 2. Okay, but to send it to a background worker, and by that I mean a separate process, that implies a lot. That is a big architectural change, because now you have to have an ability to send work to a worker, and you have to have a worker. Like, where does that come from? So Heroku does have a system to let you run other processes as a kind of background task worker, and it is such a common pattern that is very quick to do in Heroku, but I think it comes with extra cost. Because now you're talking about having not only the web machine running, but also a second machine running. And then, in addition to that, there's like a communication channel of like how does the message get from the web machine over to the worker machine, or I guess from your direction, if it's flowing left to right to left, left to right, left to right. Sorry, it's weird with cameras. Left to right, and you want the work to go from the web to the worker. How does that message get over that direction? So you need some kind of queuing system, and because in the way these systems are typically set up is you have a queue that acts as an intermediary, and by being in the middle, the web thing will put something on a queue, and the worker will be looking at the queue for new tasks to do. So that's the other way to send email, is to queue that up and let a worker do it when it's ready. And that allows, because the operation of putting something onto a queue is very quick, and that allows a web process to immediately respond from the user's point of view and see whatever UI is next, and then delays the email sending until a worker has time to process it. But that comes with cost. So that option comes with costs. So how else can we do this? And the way I thought that we could do this differently is a periodic task. So here's the flow. Here's the flow I have in mind specifically, actually. Let's bring up the invite model again. We've got our invite model, and look at the statuses that I've created here. I've created the first status is, you can see the default is pending. So what I'm saying is, what I'm going to do in my design, because I am picking this choice. Like, maybe we can get to a worker stage at the future, but for today, this is the design that I'm going to go with, and we'll talk through it. Is you click the page that says, okay, go ahead and confirm that I want to connect to so-and-so. And what's going to happen is that view is going to create an invite record. And that invite record is going to record you as the from user, and it's going to record that other user as the to user. And it's going to leave the time as null, and it's going to set the status as pending and automatically set a created timestamp. So that's the start. Then what I'm going to do is have a task that runs essentially like a cron job. So cron, if you're not familiar with it, is a system to run things on a schedule. You know, cron being like a name that has to do with time. So we can run a task on a schedule that will periodically run, and maybe it runs every 6 hours, maybe it runs every hour. I don't know the right frequency, because the more often you run it, the more cost is associated with that. But you can run scheduled tasks on Heroku by setting up a command. And what that code would do is it would do a query on the database and say, give me all of the pending invitations, and let's loop through them all and send each one, and send out the emails one at a time. And so that gets you the benefit, the speed benefit of not interrupting the user's flow. So they get a fast request. It's just as long to take create a database record, which is a pretty quick operation from their point of view. And the actual email sending would happen in a worker kind of setup, but it would happen delayed in time, because there's no guarantee that the user takes their action and the periodic task would fire immediately. So whatever that delay is, if we set it up to 24 hours, it could be as much as 24 hours before the user's invitation actually gets sent via email. So finding that right time will be important. So why this system? Well, it gets back to that question of budget. So if we're trying to be cost conscious at this early stage, then we can make some cost conscious choices. There's no rush on this project. Time to market is not important. There's already like super entrenched players, so I'm not getting any benefit by going faster in some regard. So the scheduling system that exists in Heroku is it's kind of a free service. The only cost to it is the time that the actual worker is running. So if you keep that worker time less than the total allotted time that Heroku has for their free tier, then cool, it stays free. So it kind of puts some pressure on me to balance, like, I don't want to run this too often, because if I run it too often, then I might go above the free tier level. But it's a good starting point. So the plan is, let me make it possible to send invitations on through the system of creating the state in the database, and then this periodic task will fire up. It will look for any pending stuff, loop over them, send them out, and then quit. And that's all it's going to do. And so I think this system is going to give us the right balance of performance, and also not force us down a path to create a worker yet, because I don't think that we need anything like that yet. And we probably won't need anything like that for a long time if we design this well. Okay, so that's my plan. And I think all of the actual invite model is already set up here to do this. There's another aspect of the invite model that is here that is also going to be, so there's going to be two tasks that we have to worry about. One is the actual sending of the invitations, but if you go back and read that README, I said that invites they'll have a lifetime, so they will need to expire after some point in time. So I added a class method here that can run a second scheduled task that looks for anything that is older than a certain date time and sets them to expired. Once they're expired, they're done. They can't be converted into a connection. That will be something that we code into the system. So that's kind of the state of invitations and what we're going to do. All right. So I think that's enough context to see, did we do what's all right, I've already written clearly some other pages here too, and a lot of these are taken from my other project as things that I know that we're going to need, like privacy policy and things like that, things that are just kind of grunt work. But we're down, where are we? So the next thing to do, I think, is to have this page, this button, go somewhere. Like if I click this right now, it doesn't do anything. But I want it to do something. I want it to take us to another page. And the reason I don't want this thing to be the one sending the email, because if you recall from the design that I'm outlining, invitations are a finite resource. So I want to prompt users with a couple of things. One is like, you're about to spend one of your however many invitations you have, and also have an opportunity for additional warnings and things. And what I mean by that is there are extra constraints that I want to put on invitations. For example, if somebody is signing up, I don't want them to like exhaust all of my email sending capacity for a day. So I'm going to put limits on how many invitations can go out at once. And right now, the number I have in my head is 10 invites in flight, or let's see, 10 sent invites maximum. And the goal of that is to, again, combat spammy behavior. I don't want people to come on and be like, I'm going to sign up my whole world all at once. I want people to like be a little bit more thoughtful. So if we have some constraints on, yeah, you already have 10 invites that are out and pending or out and sent out to the world, no, you have to wait, and you're consuming them. And then once they expire over a certain period of time, then people will be able to send out more invitations again. So that's a kind of messaging that I want to put in another page that is not here. And by putting that on another page, it keeps the logic on this page super simple. All I'm doing is looking up a user, and the next page can be the one that's heavier on the invitations that are going to go out. There's also a bunch of stuff about, like, you got to make sure the weird error cases, like you can't invite yourself. You can't do things like that. Can't invite people you're already connected to. You can't invite people that, I don't know. There are other constraints in there that I think are going to come up. And so we have to work through those too. Yeah. So I talked about the maximum and how many are total sent or that are currently sent, and then existing, if there are existing invites. So we got to check for that. We got to check for, let's see, we also have to check for the no self-invite check. So there's a few of these things that we got to put in there. So the get on this page, and the format of this thing I'm going to put in is you can see the URL structure here. It's the invites app, and we're going to call this send, and then it's going to be username. So initially I thought we were going to have to deal with some kind of unique identifiers, but I realized that as long as this page only works for logged in users, then I can do compare the logged in user to whatever username is put in this field, and there's no reason that I can't find an invitation from that. So from the two pieces of information, I can find a unique invite if it exists, and so that's what we need. Okay, done a lot of talking, not a lot of coding, but I think it's important to flesh out the design behind some of this stuff and give you some design thinking that I've been going through as I've been thinking through the system. And I think we're now, though, in a spot where we can actually begin some of the coding. So what kind of view is this going to be? It's the first question I want to ask. It's we're really asking, it's kind of like a form view to create an invite, but the user does not supply any information. Really? Is that true? I'm trying to think of if this is right. If I want to use a form view, or if that might be over. No, I don't think I want to do that, because a form view is something where you expect the user to have some interaction, but really it's a confirmation page, and all of the stuff that I need to display, whether it's permitted or not, is going to be things that I can look up, and the actual creation, if it is permitted, doesn't require any user input aside from them clicking the button. So it doesn't need to be a form view. That keeps things a little simpler. I think it means that we can treat this as a basic view. So let's do this. Let's create a new file. And the first one we're going to create is a test views file. Now let's get going. So from social test, import test case, because that's where our test case class is. And this is the test send invite. That's the view that we're going to create. And it's going to derive from the test case class. And the first thing I want to do is that the unauthenticated access is not permitted. I'm going to steal that test from a different file because I already have it. Do I already have it? No, that's not it. Users. there it is. This test file name is because it's using the special assert login required from Django Test Plus. And so we're going to make a user because it's going to be needed as part of the URL path. And we need to pass in, need to give it a view URL conf name. And so it's going to be in the invites app. So it's going to be invites. And then I'll just call it send. Yeah, that feels good enough because this invites app is going to be, is that true? Send invite. I grumbled there because we might put, I mentioned in the MVP that there's another category of invitations for people who are that don't already have an account. And I don't think I want to create a whole separate app just for them. I probably want to put it under the invites app, which means there's going to be a send flow for this external connection or whatever we end up calling it. So I think I'm going to be a little bit more descriptive in what the name of this view is going to be. So we'll call it invites, send invite, which I think is probably going to be the name of the view itself. And yeah, run this and it should fail. Right. Okay. So invites is not a registered namespace because we have not created the URLs file, but we're now in a position to do that. So let's go back to the invites app and we're going to create a urls.py file. And we're going to, from Django.urls import, this is going to be a path that we're going to need. And the variable that we need in a URLs file is called URL patterns. That's the name that Django expects to look to find, and it's a list of path objects. And so we want a path, and this thing is going to be called send. Again, that's going to conflict with our external request, but we might use a different name on that thing altogether. We'll find out. And then for the moment, I'm going to make up a view that I want to exist in the world. So it's going to be send invites. That's going to be the view name. And the name of the view here, I'm going to call it the same thing. So that's the URL lookup part of this. So my editor's telling me like, hey, wait a minute, there's no send invites function in the views pack, or I actually haven't even imported it yet. So we need to do that first. So we're going to do from dot import views. It's going to do a relative import, and now it's complaining, like now it's able to look up into the module and see like, wait a minute, you don't have a views function in that module, so I'm still going to complain. So if we run the test, it's still going to blow up on an import error that says it can't do that. Oh, no, it didn't, because it's looking for, what's it looking for? It's looking for the app name. So we need to give an app name, which is going to give it a namespace. So that's the first part of the URL on that test there where it says invites : send invite. The only reason that works, or the only way that can work, is by giving the URLs file a namespace in this way, using app name. I don't know why that doesn't have two spaces there. Okay, so now if we run this test, it should fail. Oh, I know what again, this is why I did test-driven development sometimes. So I've created this URLs file. I'm not using it anywhere. So we need to go into the project URLs file. And we need to come into this section here and say path invites. This is going to be, everything's going to be rooted under invites, and we'll say include social invites URLs. Now the test should fail in the way that I expect. Okay, there we go. Now we're finally cooking. So it didn't even know to look in that file. So it was never being imported, which is why it was never failing with an import error. But now it's doing what we expect, which is an attribute error that says, I can't find the send invites attribute in the views module. So we need to go into that file, invites views, and it's totally empty. For the time being, we're going to add send invites and a request and return. What are we going to return? Well, let's go ahead. I know that I'm going to want to call render later. So render takes a request and a template, which I'll say invites. Whoops. That's the wrong name. It should be singular. I don't know why I was pluralizing it. We're sending a single invite. So send invite, and we'll call it send HTML. That should be fine for now. And the last thing it takes is a context, which is a dictionary, which I will just do like this for the time being. And MyPy is complaining that it doesn't know the type, and I don't want to give it a type. We need to give the right call to render, and render comes from Django shortcuts, if I recall correctly. Okay. And then I do want to document this later. So we'll put a to-do there to remind ourselves to document this view. Okay, so now calling this test should still fail because we are missing a decorator. So this view is saying, like, when we try to call this view, it should be doing a redirect to the login page. And it's going to fail and say, like, oh, you can't do that. And oh, it's failing for other reasons because we need a converter in here. We need to actually capture a string, and we want to call it username. So that's that. And that means that our function is also going to expect a username parameter that's a string. Okay. And so it's not failing in the way that I would expect because it didn't. If this test had failed in the way that I would expect, it would say, like, it didn't actually go to the login URL, but instead it's actually failing even before it gets to that because it's trying to find this template of send.html, and it's not there. So now we can go to our templates area. We're done with this. I'm pretty sure we're done with this URL pattern now. We have the format that we expect. And so we can go to the templates area and create a new directory. And I'm going to call it invites. And then do send HTML. And this is going to extend the app HTML that I have. That's going to give it the Chrome that's on the outside of things. And in fact, I think that should be sufficient to make the test should still fail, but now it should fail for a different reason. Okay, so it got a 200 response, which means that our view worked. It got top to bottom. So with a single test, we proved out, like, all of the stuff that needs to happen to make the view work. But that's not the behavior that we want. We want to see a page when we want to redirect when the user is not authenticated. So we need to add a new decorator. That decorator comes from Django contrib auth decorators, and it's called login required. And then we add it as a decorator to the view. Now, if we run the test again, test passes. Cool. Okay, next test. Now we want to have the test that succeeds. So let's leave a template alone for the time being. We don't really care about it. And let's go back over to the user's test views because there was the form that we care about. I'm going to copy this and add our OK. OK is the response code that comes back from the browser request or the response when it's successful. There's a 200 status code is why it's listed as 200 here and why I called it OK up here. So we should be able to pass in something that says invites, send invite. And now that should work. Because remember, our view was already returning 200 response when it was failing in the last test. Because when you can log in, when you can go through the view, this render call is actually doing the right thing. That's great. Now we are ready, I think, to do some actual checking on things that we care about. So let's review our test, or let's review our issue here and see what we have. So it's interesting. I'm trying to think of like how I want to do these, because these checks, like some of them are going to be, you don't want people to abuse the system. So we're going to have to definitely check when the request is coming in on a get, but we're also going to have to do the check when somebody's actually doing a post, because a clever individual could skip the get flow of this and try and send an invitation anyway. And if we don't have the checking here to prevent that, then that's going to be bad news. So really the thing we might want to actually start with that's going to apply to both of these is to put checks in place first. And, you know, I said we don't really want form. However, the form system might be the most effective way to get this done. So what is that form? What could that form look like? It's going to have to do a lookup and say, you know, doesn't even find a form first of all, or find an invite, and then check against that, because the flow could look something like form, send invite, form, and we pass it an invite that doesn't exist yet. Let's just say none for the moment so the editor doesn't complain. So just pretend that's an invite, and then we do if form is valid, then we can post. If it's a post, we can do the right thing. I'm talking this through. I'm trying to think of like if this makes sense. Yeah, because how do I want to show? I'm thinking through how I want to show the errors on this page. I want to be able to show this page as like when you can't send. What do we use to display the errors? Yeah, form is still probably the right thing. Okay, I'm talking myself into it. We're not ready to do this yet, but that's the rough idea. So we would add into the context, we would add the form, and we'll check for errors. So that still feels like the right way to go about this. And that kind of means to me that what we really care about is that the form, this view does, what should it do instead? Sorry, I'm just thinking here through for a minute about the way I want to do this. While I'm thinking, I'll go ahead and write this doc string. send an invite to a new user. And what it's really going to do, as we said, is creates a pending invite between users. Okay. I'm trying to decide if I want the form to do the lookup of the invitation or something else. Okay. I'm wrapping myself around the axle as I'm thinking through this. I think it might be just best to write some code and move on. So we have this file. This thing has 2 working tests, and we have a skeleton of a view, and I've now declared that I want this to be a form view, and the form is going to like not have any inputs on the user side, but it would still help to display the errors that way. We'll just have to be careful about how we actually do that display. And so all of our checking that's here and can factor in, all of these checks can be calculated based on information that we pass to that form. Like it will have to pass in the user, we'll have to pass in the invite. Actually, we wouldn't even have to pass in the user because that comes implied from the invite as the from user field. Okay. And there will be some information that is not error information, that's just context that we'll need as well. So the next thing to do, I think, is to maybe step back from the view and go ahead and create the form and what I expect that to be and what do the actual error checking that I talked about. And I also want to bring up the Django Forms documentation because they give an example of what a function-based view looks like that is for a form somewhere. And there was details I forget about this that I want to do. Although I don't know if this is not a standard form because we're always going to be checking in advance. So maybe this doesn't even make sense to follow this pattern. Even though this is the standard form pattern of you check the method type, and if it's a post, you get ready to like validate it, and this would be the actual like creation of the invite. And if it's not, you would do an empty form. But I still want the form to already do the checking no matter what. So I think this is actually going to be slightly inverted this time and have the form with the content be on the outside. And I don't really even care. Like this is creating a form that's using the post data, but I'm not going to care. I'm going to create that invite on my own. So it's a bit different from a standard form in that way. We're going to use a single clean method. So this is kind of abusing. I think the reason I'm struggling with this view a little bit is I'm not following a standard path to deal with forms. I'm shoehorning some stuff into the form system that maybe I shouldn't be. But enough of its features are valuable that I think it's still the right call. Okay, so what does this thing need for sure? Hey R4V, welcome. Thanks for tuning in. I'm working on some views, as you can see, and going to be creating a form in just a second. But before I move on to the form, I want to add some context. Well, I guess I need the form in the context. I also want the invite in the context. That's the other thing. So we're going to do an invite factory. Call invite factory. And the thing I want to pass in is nope, never mind. There's not going to be an invite in the context. I don't think it will need to. Last time I streamed 2 weeks ago. I was out on vacation last week, going to out into the woods, or a nice lake with my family. So wasn't online last week, but was on before that. Okay, I know that the context is definitely going to want the form. I don't think it's actually going to want the invite. The more I think about that, I don't think it matters. And I do want to check that the form is in the context, but since the form doesn't even exist yet, we're not ready for that. So let's actually, let's get rid of this, and let's save that. And let's go, this is just something I've been, it's a wild hair idea that I had, and I've decided to make it on my own. Nobody's prompted me to make a social network, and it's probably a crazy idea from that regard to make a social network, but it's fun nonetheless. And we're going to come in here and create a new file. We're going to create forms py, and from Django import forms. And we've got the class that we're going to have is the send invite form. And it will subclass forms.form. So the reason that this feels a little silly is forms expect form fields to be here, and we're not going to have any. All we're going to have is a clean method, ultimately, which I don't want to implement yet, but that's going to be the first thing. So we've got that, and I want to, what's next? We want to create another test file. And you can see, I don't know, so I also podcast, and I talked about applications in the last podcast, and I commented on the scaffold that comes with the start app command makes a test.py file. And this app is already, like, this app barely has anything in it, and it's already illustrative of why I delete the test.py file and replace it with a test package. We already are into a third test file to properly separate the different pieces that are in the Django app, and they all have the nice place to go because we're following the standard conventions here. So a little tangent, but still I think worth highlighting. So a little bit more boilerplate, but that's okay. It'll serve us well in the long run. So we'll create a new one for the send invite form now. And the first thing I want to do is check that the form constructor will receive an invite. That'll be important for this. So test has invite. Let's see, the form includes an invite, and I'm going to attach it as an attribute on the form to give it easy access. So we'll say invite is equal to invite factory. That will create a new one. So we're going to have to import that. So from social invites, tests, factories, import invite factory. So that should get rid of that. And the other thing that we need is a form. And the form is already there. So from social invites dot forms import send invite form. Okay. And so now we're going to say form is equal to send invite form. And this isn't going to work yet because the it's just not going to work yet. The built-in form class doesn't know what an invite is, and it expects something else as its first argument, so it's going to blow up. And this certainly isn't going to work because form invite is not going to be added to the form. But this is ultimately the test that we want. I want to prove that the invite is attached to the form. And Well, I guess this thing passed for reasons I didn't anticipate. So what does the form actually take as its first attribute? Let's bring up the code. So I'm in the Django repo. I happen to have it side by side here. And I want to go to Django Forms. And I guess let's check out init first. I don't remember where. Oh, guys and gals. They did a star import. All right, I'm not a fan of that, but whatever. Not my choice. Class form. Here's our form, which is got meta classes. How deep does this rabbit hole go? Let's find the base class, base form, I mean. Okay, so the first attribute that it tries to take is data. And it's trying to, well, that's going to be a problem. Because I want to pass an invite, and maybe I need to pass it in as a keyword only argument. That's probably gonna, that's the way that way it won't bind. Is that gonna work? Yeah, I think that should work. I'm gonna try and take advantage of a Python 3 only feature. And I don't run a ton of Python 3, but so we're gonna say invite equals invite. And that should fail this for a different reason. So it got an unexpected keyword argument because, again, this is just deriving from the form class, and we've not overridden the init method, so it doesn't know what this is. But it's time to come up here and override that init method. And we're going to give it self, and I'm just going to slurp up star args and star keyword args. And then we also need a keyword only argument. And I always forget the syntax for that. I think it's a star. Python keyword only argument. I think it's a star comma, but let's confirm. Yeah, so give it a star and then give it a keyword. Okay. Star invite it can be none by default because that will be a valid use case of the invite doesn't exist yet. And then we want to call, we want to do two things. We want to call super and pass it the init with star args and star keyword args. And we want to set self invite equal to invite. Invalid syntax. Why is that invalid syntax? Okay, hold on. Let's see if we can figure it out. It might not like the fact that I'm trying to do star keyword args and let's see if I can do this. Search for this. You know what, let's do this differently. Forget about keyword args. It's a cool feature, but we don't need it. What I will do instead is force an error in usage behavior by trying to pop off. If it's missing from keyword args, then I'll try and take it that way. So we'll still call it this way. But the difference is we're going to move this up here and we're just going to say keyword args pop invite. So keyword args functions like a dictionary, right? So by saying pop, we're saying you must get this must be provided as a keyword arg. Like if I try to do this, this should blow up. The pop it should fail. It's not going to find it in the keyword args because I didn't pass it as a keyword arg. Yeah, it's going to give me the key error here. But if I now pass it like this, then it passes. And I'm doing this because I don't want this first argument to be misconstrued as the data parameter of a form. This normally wouldn't be an issue if I did something like, if this was going to function like a regular form, and I did invite and then passed in data request post. I'm making this up just so you can see it, but if this is the canonical way to create a form and bind it to the data, but there's not going to be any data to bind it for this form. We're just taking advantage of forms for the purpose of having the clean method and using the error attributes that come out of it. So I'm kind of abusing forms a little bit. So in order to do this safely and in a way that's I'm going to be happy with, I'm going to pass it in as this keyword arg and force it this way. So that does leave us with a passing test, which is good. Okay. I'm also noticing some other things here that it's not going to work with this. So the immediate problem is we're going to need a user as well, because as I just said, this invite is optional. It's going to be passed in, but I might be passing in invite none, like that. And in that case, I'm not going to be able to do the clean checking on whoever the authenticated user is. So we need to pass in a user as well. This is feeling I'm feeling like I'm not doing this right. I feel like there should be ways to do this, but maybe it is because I'm not binding. Let me go look at let's look at the homeschool project for a second. I know I have views that do pass in other things. Put that first. Okay, I think I'm being foolish about this. If I put this argument first and override that, and then I just make the super call all the rest, then okay. I've been really dumb about this. I apologize, y'all. So let's put, we're going to need two things that are going to have to come in here. The invite and the from user. Because as I said, the invite may be none. And so we actually want to save both of those attributes. We'll say invite and from user as the from user. Both those would be good. So, okay, so now we can clean this up and we'll say invite. We'll take advantage of the fact that this has a from user. This has a user record already. Okay. So momentary lapse in thinking, but we're back to where we need to be. We want a second test for the from user as well. I can't just do a replace because that'll replace too much. So invite, replace that with from user. Do that, not that one, not that one. No, no, yes, and from user. Okay. Now we have the two attributes on our form that will be critical for all the checking we have to do. All right, time for the clean method. And that's not in here. Where's clean? We want to get the cleaned data. That's the only one. Okay, we'll just come different path. And customizing validation. Def clean. Okay, there it is. So we need to be able to, we need to be sure to call and get the clean data, and I'm pretty sure we have to return it, but I could be wrong about that part. Okay, maybe not. I think it's just for extra validation. Yeah. Okay. So this form is going to set a pending invite if valid. That's really what the form is trying to do. We're going to have a save method on here later, but we're not going to get to that probably tonight. So let's have a clean method. And we have cleaned data is super clean. Call the parent class and get the cleaned data, not date. Okay, and we'll use that in a bit. Well, I'm actually not convinced because there's no form field, so I actually don't know that we need to call that. I'm not sure it's going to do anything, but I think it's best to follow what is it, list substitution principle or whatever, and call it anyway. Okay. So what's the first error check that we want? We want to error if there is an existing invite. That's an error condition right out of the gate. Test invite exists. So an existing invite is an error. All right. And so let's set up the test. And the reason I like these form tests is that they're fast. Like it's not doing any of the request processing. So it's really just about as fast as Python can go. I mean, it's creating some database data here, so that's not super fast, but the actual form operations are very quick. So we want, we essentially want this call right here as it exists and have an invite. And we want to check if it's valid and say form is valid. And we want to assert that it's not valid. Right now it's going to fail because it's just calling clean. The simple check that we're going to add is if self.invite. That's it. Then we're going to raise a forms validation error, and the message is going to be you have already sent an invitation, because these are things that we're going to display to the user. So I want them to be messages that are already in a human readable format or a user-friendly format. I always want to go for human readable, but when it comes to messaging, but a user-centric format are things that we want to display to them. Okay, so that test passes, and let's see, what can we do here? We can say, I'm trying to think if I want to raise that error and stop processing. I probably do, because there's no point in checking anything else. So that's okay. So we'll say assert, and the thing I'm trying to do now is check the actual error message. So non-field errors. And I don't think it's going to work like this, but we'll try it. You have already sent an invitation. There's a mismatch in structures there. Oh, okay. That's not what I expected. I thought I called that as it was an empty list. So, okay, what were the errors then? Print form errors. Because it's not showing up as the non-field error, so where did our error message go? That's not good. And it's not showing up here either. It's not good at all. Why is our clean method we could add a validation error. Yeah. Fine. Well, that's weird. Let's go back to that clean example. Yeah, here it is. They're raising a validation error. And they're getting it from Django core exceptions, which I probably could be doing, but I don't think that's truly necessary. I think the forms module, I'm really abusing the fact that the forms module also happens to be importing validation error somewhere, but I like it. I think it leads to a nice looking name. I'm confused about why didn't this validation error get tracked? It should be, because I mean, it definitely was the right code. So if we change this and comment that at code out and rerun the test, it says it was not valid. If something is not valid, there should be something in the errors. That's what's confusing. It's an empty list. It should not be empty. That just seems wrong. Why errors didn't populate. So, okay, am I interpreting this correctly? Now I'm probably missing something obvious. Oh, yep, I am. We didn't bind. It's not a bound form. And so validation is going to fail because it thinks there's nothing to check. So I bet if we do assert form is, I think it's is bound. I think that's the attribute. Yeah, it's false. So that's a problem. So the fact that I'm abusing the form system, as I said I was going to do, is Django doesn't like that. So let's give it an empty dictionary. Fake or make a bound form, even though there will never be user data. So I'm going to set that and go into the keyword args and set data and just set it to a dictionary. All right, so now that I've done that, now if we come back here and say assert form is bound, I should just undid what I had. That should now be true. Okay, so you can see how it got through here, and it was now a bound form. So a bound form is when you take user data and you combine it with the form so that the isValidation checking really happens. And it is normally what you want to do with a form, because normally you're using a form to receive user input. In this case, I'm using a form just for its cleaning characteristics. And so the fact that I hadn't passed in any data to it, it said, no, you can't do that. And so the isValid check, the first thing that it does is it looks to see if the form is bound. And if it's not a bound form, it immediately bails on the rest of validation and won't proceed. So now that the form is bound, we're now going to get into the clean method as we would expect. And now this validation error should be properly tracked as a non-field error, is my expectation. So we'll run this again. It's still going to be the wrong format. It's still going to be a list, but now it's a list that actually has content in it, which is good news. So we can flip this around, and we can say, let's delete all of that stuff and put it here, and then go over here. And so this string should be in the non-field errors list. And it is. And let's get rid of the print while we're here. So coming back over to our set of checks, and I didn't write this very well. Let's redo this. So we want to have a check for currently in flight, and this isn't going to be perfectly formatted, but it's okay. And this is the one that we just did, so put an X there. And you can't invite yourself is the other one. And so let's clean up that. And we'll just say check this, max check, check existing invite, check no self-invite, and then delete this. These are all the things that we actually care about. Okay. Oh, I'm wrong. We need one more piece of information in our view. We need the toUser as well. So, okay, maybe we do want some form attributes here. That might get around some of this stuff. Well, let's talk out the implications of this. What I'm thinking of is having some form fields for from user and to user, and then having those be hidden fields in the actual form. And that would make us have to actually pass in data. And so we wouldn't do any of these like shenanigans around like creating an empty data dictionary to make it a bound form. That seems like the right move. And the other benefit is it gets around us having to pass in from user and to user. It really starts us to move us a little closer to the framework. And so something I can always recommend is like, don't try to fight the framework, because there's a bunch of things in the framework that if you are following the path as much as you can, then it's going to generally work out better for you. So what do we want? We want to do, let's rework some of these tests then. I do want to pass in data, and I don't want to pass in the from user. We're going to make these private fields, as I said. So we need a few things. We need a form field, and the form fields, let's go to, let's go back to the documentation. There's a form fields section, built-in fields, and we require, what do we require? Essentially, it's a expectation of a foreign key. Model choice field, I think. Why am I blanking out on this? That's not cool. That doesn't feel super right. Because that's a choice, but that's not what I want, is it? And my brain's starting to fail on me, I guess. Because I've like written long articles about forms and stuff. You would think I would know this stuff better than I do. But even I get forgetful. Yeah, it could be a model choice field. Because I'm looking for one that like connects to an actual foreign key of the model. Sorry, I'm getting a little weary here, I guess, which means I'm probably getting close to a point where I need to wrap up. But so if we had the form field and it receives the model choice, and the model choice, the query set on that is on the user, then on the user record, that query set, then I think we get what we need to get. Because what will come into the clean method is the from user and the to user, and then we'd be able to use them and check against them. Pretty sure that's right. Let me come over here back to my other project and see if that's a model multiple choice field. Yeah, model choice. Okay, I guess I hadn't used it yet on that project. We're going to use it here. The from user is forms model choice field, and it's going to be a query set. And our query set is going to be all users. We don't want any extra filters on this. And when the data is going to pass in the ID of the user that we want to look on. So that's what it's going to. The only way it can do that proper query set is by getting the query set handed to it. And so we want this to be required as true. And I'm not going to be rendering this form, so a lot of this stuff doesn't really matter. And from social users dot models import user. Okay, and then we also want the to user. That's both of those pieces of information will be critical for connecting the invite together. And now the question I'm wondering is, do we even need to pass in the invite externally, or is that something that I should look up? I should probably look it up in the clean method. I don't even think we need to pass it in externally. So the more I get through this, the more I'm realizing like I was way overthinking what I was doing. And the nice benefit, check this out. The nice benefit is now we get to delete this whole block. All of that goes away. So spend all that time thinking about it, but boom, gone. And the next thing we're going to do is, well, I guess this is no longer true. This test goes away, and this test goes away. We don't need those there. We'll look them up later. Okay. This test is now going to fail, though, because there's no invite attribute. And invite, oh, that's interesting. Invite object has no attribute yet. Oh, I was still passing it. Still passing it the invite, but that's supposed to be the data now. So we want to pass in, we now need to rework this to pass in the data that we care about. And the data is going to be the from user, which is going to be the string representation of invite from user ID. And we also need to pass in the to user, which similarly is going to be the string representation of the invite to user ID. And we'll change everything in here and say data equals data. Now this is looking more and more like a standard Django form, and I'm feeling much better about this already. Okay, now it's going to complain it doesn't have any attribute invite, and it's right, because we just deleted that. So what we have to do with our clean here is we're going to do the work here. We're going to say we need to pull out the from user and the to user. And that implies actually two tests that we're going to need to check. Def test missing from user. Maybe not. Not a missing from user. We need to test an invalid from user. Because I think by adding the required attribute, we could get a real ID, but the scenario that can still pop up is like if I'm requesting an ID that is to a user that is guaranteed not to exist, like if I passed in a number of 0. So we'll leave that as a placeholder for now, and I probably won't implement that tonight because that's boring and y'all don't need to see that. So we'll worry about those those checks later. And we want to get out the clean data. And so for the time being, we're just going to say that we get the from user out of this thing. Get from user. And the important thing to note is the clean method, by having a model choice field and doing against the user, is that it's going to do the real query, and that if the user actually exists, this from user is not going to be an ID, but it will be the user record itself. Now, we don't necessarily need that, but that's just information about it. So we're going to get out the clean data and get the to user additionally. And then the other thing we're going to do is once we have those, now we're going to check for the invite. So we're going to say the only reason we needed the invite model is to check if something exists. So we want to say invite, if invite objects, filter, and then give from user equal from user and to user equal to user. If that exists, then we want to raise this validation error. And invite isn't imported yet, so let's do that. Let's go from dot models import invite. So now we have everything that I think should be there, and our test still passes. That's good news. Look how much that has, like, now this feels like a real proper Django model, and it's going to give us a something nicer, I think, for the actual view itself as well when we're considering stuff. We still might want to do some checking or look at extra information to add to the context. But in terms of the errors we want to display about the reasons why they can or cannot actually send something, this is a good place to start. The only sticky part is on a GET request, we're also going to want to bind the form. That's going to be a difference from other kinds of form views, but that's something that's fine to do, I think. Okay, what's left here? Well, there's a lot left. Let's do a little bit, maybe one or two more of these checks, and then we'll call it a night, because I've been looking at the clock here. I'm running for about 2 hours so far. Okay, let's do this self-invite check. You can't invite yourself. So test no self-invite. A user may not invite themselves. Thanks, GoGuppy. I appreciate that. Hopefully you get to learn something here today. If not, appreciate you being around. Themself, is that even the right word? Whatever. English at 11 o'clock at night, not a good fit. Okay, we aren't going to use an invite, but we do need a user. And actually, that's going to be like the same user. So we'll do user is equal to self make user. That's coming from our test plus. So that's the user we're going to work with. And then we're going to take our data dictionary and fill it in. I'm going to change some stuff about it. And we're going to get rid of the invite and from part. And it's going to simplify down to this. And so now this is now the condition that we care about. And we need to change the message to say, you may not invite yourself. You're already here. So kind of be a little encouraging, perhaps, in the message, to be a little whimsical. Like I don't want all these error messages to be super stuffy. Social networks should be a place that are joyful to use, I would think, and many of them are not. So let's see if we can fix that. So we're getting past this first check, and the next one we want to do, we don't even want to bother checking anything else. There's no reason to check it if the user is trying to invite themselves. The invalid checks will come into play because like this would trigger something if both. Well, never mind. It's a scenario that would never occur. I was just gonna say, actually, could occur. Sorry, I'm being super vague. I apologize. The from user and the to user could both be invalid. A post, like somebody could send a post request that has like just junk data. Both from user and to user are 0, for example. In that case, both of these values would be none. So we would want to say, we don't just want to say if from user equals to user. That is the check we want to do, but we also have to make sure that from user is a value and to user is a value. But I think I don't want to bother putting that here because that's going to be applied to like everything. So what's going to be needed is I want to check that both are valid users, and that's what those invalid tests are below. And if we put that above here and don't wait to do that, then it leaves this code simpler. Because I mean, look at this if statement. This looks completely gnarly. Like there's 3 things going on and it just looks terrible. So now in contrast, this is like really obvious. There's only one thing that this is doing. And so when we raise here and we have the confidence from an earlier section that this is correct, then we don't have to worry about it showing the wrong error message for the wrong state because there's previous checking, or there should be. So now we want to put in our you may not invite yourself message, and you're already here. And I think that's going to go over Black's max limit, but it formatted that okay. And test passes, great. Well, that was pretty quick. So maybe let's do another one. Let's see how far we can get. Okay. So I said, so both of these are constraints now to try and avoid spammy behavior. Let's do this first one first because it's easier. We need some kind of constant to check. And I'm going to create a new module just for constants. Because I've seen over the long-term benefit of having a separate file with just constants, especially if apps start to build upon each other and need to check constants across applications. What I've seen happen and what I deal with at work, for example, is that constants get defined in like a models file. And then in order to access a constant, you're either duplicating it or you're importing a models file from a different application into the current application, and it leads to messy import structures and circular loops and stuff. But if you have a constants module that's nothing more than, like I said, constant kind of values, then it's a very, very safe operation to import those modules and not worry about the dependency graph that you're creating, because you're always importing at like this leaf level. So we are going to do that today. We'll go, and the thing that we need a constant for is sent, the max, we'll say the maximum sent invites, or the maximum currently sent invites, something like that. The idea is like, I don't want to have people sending or have people be able to send more invites than at too many at once, in other words. So let's create a new module, call it constants. And again, it needs to be descriptive. Also, these are going to be constants, so I'm going to give them, put them in all caps so it's very clear. So we'll say max is sending invites. Does that feel right? That feels a little wrong to me. We'll work with that name for a minute. Max. I don't know. Max invites current. Okay. The other way I could do this is like max currently sent invites. That's to say, you've got too many currently out, but what does currently mean? Currently is based on a time range that we're going to give it, that we need to check. So that's going to be another constant actually that we want, and we'll put in here as well. Okay, I'm going to work with that, and if I don't like the name, I'll rename it in the future, but I probably won't. Just the reality. Sometimes you just got to pick a name and go with it. But I will give it some documentation that makes me feel good about it. This is the maximum number of invites in the pending or sent state that a user can have out. Okay, that makes enough sense to me. Hopefully it makes sense to you. If you think of a better name, drop it in the chat. Okay, so now we want our test, and then our new test is what? The new test is let's do, we'll call it the name I was giving it on the issue because it feels good to me. And I was debating calling this constant this name, and I may still, in-flight invites, because that means like how many are out there. Yeah, the more I say that, the more I'm like, I want to change that constant name. So let's do that now. Currently sent just doesn't resonate with me. Maximum in-flight invites. So they're out and they're being processed. Okay. And we want to say for the doc string, the user can't submit more than the max in flight. Okay, and I want to write this test, and you notice that there are, this number is 10, and that's the number that I want to have in the application, but I don't want to test that many. I don't want to have to create I mean, 10 is not a huge number. It's not unreasonable, but it's more than I want in the test, because it does take time to even make these factory calls. Like I could make a for I in range and then max whatever, and I might actually still have to do that, and then call invite factory. Let's see. Let's go ahead and let's just put it down. Invite factory, and say that the user has to be the from user, is equal to a user that we create in advance, so that they're all associated with the same one. So this is still part of the test. So let's go ahead and do that. And we want to put this in a constants module that I'll import that way, and then say from social invites import constants. Okay, so now we're creating them, but if I run this test, it will still run pretty quickly. It's pretty snappy. In fact, it was so snappy that maybe I shouldn't care. Maybe 10 is a reasonable enough number. No, I'm going to do it. I'm going to do it anyway. I'm going to set it to a different number, and it will also let me eliminate this range check, because I do find that confusing. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to mock the constant, and so we'll do this. We'll do mock patch, and I want to change the place where this is going to be imported. So social invites forms, and the max in-flight invites is the name of the constant, and I want to say the return value is going to be 1. I think this will work. It might need to be a property mock. I don't talk a lot about mocking, but it's useful, but I'm not going to discuss it too much tonight. I want to get this cranked out. So apologies if you don't really understand mock and what I'm doing right now, but the idea is I'm essentially, for the scope of this test, that's why it said it got the decorator on it, I'm trying to replace the 10 with a 1, and that way it doesn't create 10 invites in this loop, it only creates a single one. And I can test this error checking condition by, if I just make 2, then I can get over the max. Or really, I just want to have a 1. Just if it's equal to, it's less than or equal to the max, then it's good. So if I run this, let's see if it works. Yeah. Oh, I didn't import it in the form yet. So let's go into the form, and it's keeping me honest in here. And we want to say from.import constants, and that's not going to be used yet, but that's okay. Max in-flight invites. What's wrong with that? Oh. Constants. Wrong test. I didn't actually inject the parameter. Mock max in flight invites. Okay, so all of that worked. I mean, there's nothing asserting yet, so I'm not convinced that it actually worked, but because we're not actually calling it yet. But that did something closer to what we expect. And there is a challenge here that by doing this, I can't actually reference this, because this value is still referring to the 10. In the scope of this, it's not referring to the 1. So that for loop doesn't make any sense. But all I need is 1 to check against. And so we want to take the same, or I guess we can check, what can we do? We want to make 2 users. So we've got the make user, but we can't use that a second time because I think it uses the same name. Is that right? Maybe not. Let's try it twice, see if it works. I think I might have corrected the problem that was preventing it from doing that in the past. So from user and the to user, and we want to have that be equal to self make user. Does this work so far? Integrity error. Nope, they have the same username. Shoot. Rats. Okay. Well, let's do this then. User factory. From user. And we haven't used it yet, but we are going to need from user and to user for a new invite. Let's come up to this spot, take all this stuff. In fact, let's take all of it, including the assertions. And we're going to delete off the invite part here. And we also need to bring in the user factory. So from social users tests factories import user factory. Okay, let's talk through this test. So we have the two users that, like, this is somebody wants to create an invite, and so this is a legit request, or it should be, except that the thing that's making it not legit is that they already have an open invitation that they're dealing with, and it's going to put them over the max that is allowed in flight, the max that are allowed. And we need to have some kind of message here, and this might be additionally like information that I want to put in the context in advance when they even get to the page. Yeah, well, might be an error message. An error message is probably sufficient, actually. I was just trying to think, like, do I want to them to know how many invites they already have out before they even try and send it? So I might just add this information to the context anyway. We'll see. And you have too many sent invitations out currently. And I'll have to explain, the logic for sending will have to explain that you can only send so many in a certain amount of time. Okay, so I think this is the test, but nothing is blocking it. Like everything, there's no extra cleaning code in there yet, so it's getting through everything because there's no guards that say this is wrong. So what we need is, beyond this step, we need to now have this extra check that says, what is it going to say? If the invite objects dot filter from user, we need to have it in the right state too. So we have the from user, and we want to filter on objects that are in one of two states. So the status is in either invite status pending. Let's put these in a group. I don't want to always be writing these because I'm going to have to write them multiple times, I'm guessing. So I want to say invite in flight statuses. I guess this will probably forever cement the name of this, unless we want to change it. And so that gets us that, and then we're going to get the count of these. And if it's greater than or equal to, I'm doing greater than in case there's like some race condition, because somebody might be able to like somehow it would be possible to get over this somehow, and you don't want to just pin at just the right amount, because if that person then gets over and then tries to create tons of events, there'd be nothing blocking them if it was only an equality check. So you want to say if it's greater than or equal to the constants max in-flight invites, then we want to raise that validation error. Forms validation error, and whatever I said in the test. You have too many sent invitations out currently. Okay, and then constants. All right, so it's going to blow up on me because in-flight statuses doesn't exist yet. So we need to make that exist, and it's going to be a list. So we're going to go to the models file, and we're going to, after invite status here, we're going to say in flight statuses, and it's going to be a list of invite status pending and invite status sent. By doing that, we now have a convenient category that we can point at. And I'm doing this as like I've learned from personal experience that if you have groupings of kind of status things that are related, they stand for a common concept, you will make a mistake at some point in the future if you don't find some common name to bind them together. I mean, it's not a guarantee, but you're likely to make a mistake, is my experience. So we'll try this, and okay. Shoot. All right, well, what are we gonna do? Our mocking isn't working here, so we'll say mock, we'll do the mock the constants, the whole module, which I'm not really crazy about, but it's okay. And we're going to delete all that. So now we have mock constants, and now we can say mock constants max in-flight invites, and then that can be 1. Yeah, I think that'll work. Okay, so what happened there? Because we set this to 1 instead of 10, the fact that we only had a single 1 already was enough to get this count to be greater than or equal to, and so it raised the form validation error. So I think that's good there. This clean method's getting a little long. We might actually refactor a bit of this to actually name them on the things that we're talking about. Let's do that. Let's say yeah, let's do some refactoring to finish this off, because I don't want to introduce the max check. That's other stuff that I don't want to think about right now. I am using Vim. That's my editor du jour here. I've got splits going on, so that's what you're seeing, and it works for me. It's a little small for you, I realize. Sorry about that. It's hard working on streaming and figuring out the right sizing, so I try not to have too many panels. This is Mac OS. Yeah, you probably can't see my Chrome, but here you go. Standard Mac terminal on Mac OS. Okay. I've got it kind of tricked out a little bit, which might be why it looks a little bit like that. What was I doing? I was refactoring. That's right. Okay, we have 3 different if checks here, and you can see that the okay. Do you like GVM? There are things about GVM that I'm not crazy about, which is why I just stick with the standard terminal. But Everybody has their own opinion about Vim stuff, especially. So let's put this chunk into a method and this chunk into a method, because each of these is raising independently. And that way we can pass in the right stuff. Yeah, split. So that's certainly Dev, that's interesting. So I think that, like, I've seen like a handful of ways that people deal with Vim. They either get into the tabs. There's like a camp that likes dealing with Vim tabs, which I don't. I mean, as I just showed, like I deal with the actual terminal tabs but then that stuff is outside of Vim. Come on, get back where you're supposed to be. And there's a group that likes dealing with like just buffers, navigating around buffers. And then I like to use splits I feel like it lets me have side-by-side code. And normally when I'm not streaming, frankly, my splits are usually 2 vertical panes. And like on my Mac, the problem, like the reason I can't do that here is I'm losing like a 20% of my window because of chat stuff that I may be able to read and stuff. So I'm artificially constraining it, which is why, like when you saw the split from a second ago, this doesn't read well because this is not even, it doesn't go out to 80 characters even. I think, well, I don't actually know what the character column is. What is that? 70 or something? It doesn't really matter. So I have to do this kind of double thing. Okay. Vim on the command line too. That's great. So we've got now tests. This is where having tests is useful for refactoring, because these 5 tests pass in a fraction of a second. And so we can now refactor, and if we blow something up, I've got all of these lines covered, so I can do this in confidence, is my opinion. So the first thing I want to do is create a new method at the bottom here, and I'm going to do def, and it's going to be check existing invite. And it's going to, well, let's not worry about the parameters it takes yet, just so we can see the full refactoring step. And we'll take this and drop it down here, and my editor is going to complain, and it says from user and to user are not defined. So we need to pass in from user and to user, just like that. And now if I run the test again, we're going to get a failing, we should get a failing test, because we did have good test coverage. And the reason we get the failing test is because we're not actually calling this little helper method now. So I'm going to replace it with a call to check existing invite and pass in from user and to user. Rerun the test. 1 down. Okay. Next thing we want to do, test check self. Now self invite. Let's be a bit more descriptive. And again, we'll follow the same pattern of assuming that there are no parameters, which is not true. But what's a good place to start to let us see the errors and be driven by errors here to guide us. And we're going to pass in from user and to user and run the test again. It still fails because we have good test coverage. So now we're going to do self check self invite and from user and to user. And then the next one I want to do, I want to call it def check in flight invites. Self, and take this whole chunk, put it there, and this one only needs from user. Do that. Should still fail because you have that test checking for in-flight stuff. So now we do self check in flight and we pass it from user. That was quick, but hopefully you could see the benefit of having a good solid test suite that is guiding you. And the benefit now from my point of view is I can come into this method and I can see here are the things that we're trying to check about this before we can declare this thing as clean. Each one of these is we're going to raise if it has a problem. Okay, so we've done those 3 checks, and we're not going to do the max check. We're going to stop. I'm going to go on for almost 2.5 hours, so I'm getting worn out. So what are we going to do next time? I might offline actually finish this. This is going to be kind of more of the same, and I said some of these tests were going to be kind of boring. What might be interesting that I may revisit and let people see is how this came out of, like, what did I actually end up passing into this view, because I need to build out the view and what to display, and then do the actual post to create. So there's some view, a bit of view logic that's going to be happening here, although this post is not, the view itself is not going to do the work. So what's going to happen, the overall flow is back in this views file, which we've been ignoring for quite a while. We will bind the form to the data that's going to come from this, or if it's a GET request that is not a post, then we're going to pass in the whatever user we can find from the logged in user, and whatever user we can find from the username, and create a bound form. So either way, we're going to create a bound form, and if it validates, we're going to end up calling form.save, not from.save, form.save, which doesn't exist yet, but that form.save will create a new invite and put it in the pending state as we chatted about. So that's what this view is going to do. And then once, well, actually, we could do here. Let's finish off one thing here to before we call this a night, to kind of fully close the loop on this bit of this view and hook it into things, and then see it in practice. So let's go back to the user detail page, and as a reminder, that's this page that has just a button that if you're not connected to someone, you will see this button, and it's going to take you to the send page, which gives you all this information about, do you want to send, and does all this checking that we've just been talking through. And we want to hook this up. So right now it's going nowhere, and we want to switch this to URL invites, and it's going to be send invite is what we called it. And the first parameter that we're going to pass to this is the viewed user username. And if you're like used to Django, you might be like, what the heck is a viewed user? This is an interesting scenario where I'm using the detail view from Django, and a detail view by default wants to provide something into the context that has the same name as the model class that you're working with. But in the context of a user detail page, that name would be user. But user conflicts with the auth system. So I had to, I'll show it for just a real quick second, just because I thought it was interesting, because I've never encountered it before. I had to rename the context object of what it put in there so that I wouldn't shadow the user that came from the auth system. So, and you can see I even have to use this in the logic here. So I already have some protections that are going to make sure that people don't invite themselves, but there's always going to be that one person who, or many people who will type in the URL manually and trying to see what they can see, because those people exist, because hey, sometimes I am that person. So we've now hooked up the send invite view, and I'm going to save it. And so right now you can see this is going to hash. If you look in the lower left corner, hopefully you can see that part of my browser. I'm going to refresh, and now it's taking us to invites send Matt. If I click on it, we don't have the template yet, but the URL up here, which I hope you can see, does have the right name to it. And this is where we'll put in, we're going to display information about, like, you have this many invites left. You can actually send this. Like, if there's no errors on the form, the button will be, press go kind of thing. And if you can't send it, it'll be grayed out and so on. But that's next time. So anyway, I take this content and I put it up on YouTube. So if you want to check out more of what I've done, we're just going to keep going on this. And I'm working towards this final goal of getting the invite system in place. And launch for me looks like this. We've talked about the MVP of features on here. We're currently working through people that already have accounts. And then the next step is for people that don't have accounts. So sending out emails to your friends that aren't part of the system if they're interested. And that takes care of like half of the MVP stuff. But the frankly more interesting stuff from like this, what a social network perspective is what we're going to deal with, like access control and these ideas that I've had around what can people see and how are we going to do this. So I'm still thinking through this part from a modeling perspective. There's a lot there, and we're doing this part because it's a bit more straightforward, yet still kind of interesting. It has state machines and things kind of built into it. But that's the plan. We're going to continue on this, and once this minimum is in place, I might even have this up sooner than that, and let people on the stream like know about it and start poking at it, signing up, and seeing what they think about it. And then we'll start talking about other features that we want to add that we think would be beneficial for a social network that makes this useful. So that's my plan. Thanks for joining in. If you want to find this information in the future, you can go to my website, mattlehman.com, where I post like show notes about all these streams. And I'm on YouTube. You can follow me there or subscribe. There's so many social platforms. I get confused on the name of follow, subscribe, whatever. Subscribe to me there, notification bells and all that jazz if you're into that. But just want to thank you all for joining in, and have a great night. Take care.